He arrived not with a proclamation but with a silence that settled over the land like the first thin layer of dust on an untouched shelf. Jedediah was a man carved from the very wind and rock of the high plains, his face a roadmap of seasons endured elsewhere, his eyes holding the quiet patience of mountains. The townsfolk of Prosperity, a settlement built on the bold promise of its own name, saw him acquire the most undesirable plot of land, a windswept, barren hillock on the edge of the valley that no one else wanted. It was considered poor grazing, worse for farming, and a fool's choice for a homestead. He moved with a deliberate economy of motion, his only companion a magnificent German shepherd named Bo, whose gaze was as steady and watchful as his master's. They watched him unload a sparse collection of belongings, tools worn smooth by the hands of his father and grandfather before him. There was no wife, no children, just the man, his dog, and an unshakable sense of purpose that radiated from him, unsettling the boisterous, forward-looking citizens of the town. They were people who built upwards, their proud wooden storefronts and two-story homes reaching for the vast, unforgiving sky. Jedediah, however, looked down. He would spend hours walking his small plot of land, his hand trailing over the dry grasses, his head cocked as if listening to a conversation no one else could hear. He'd crumble the soil between his calloused fingers, smelling it, tasting its dryness. He was not looking for gold or water, he was assessing its substance, its density, its memory. The people of Prosperity prided themselves on their mastery over the land, on bending it to their will with plows and hammers. Jedediah seemed to be asking for its permission. Then, he began to dig. It started with a single shovel, the blade biting into the hard-packed earth with a rhythmic scrape and thud that carried on the wind. At first, they thought he was digging a root cellar, a sensible if oversized project for a lone man. But the days turned into weeks, and the hole grew deeper, wider, the pile of excavated earth beside it swelling into a miniature version of the hill it came from. Sterling Vance, the town's land agent and a man whose confidence was as starched as his collar, rode out to see him. Jedediah, he called out, his voice edged with condescending curiosity, a man could lose a horse in that hole. What in God's name are you building? Jedediah paused, leaning on his shovel, his breathing even despite the labor. Bo sat at the edge of the pit, a silent, furry sentinel. A home, Jedediah said, his voice raspy from disuse. Vance chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. A home? Down there? Sir, we build our homes to see the sunrise, not to greet the worms. Jedediah wiped a line of sweat from his brow with the back of his hand and looked past Vance, toward the distant, jagged peaks of the mountains. The sky is a fickle friend, he said, his words sparse but heavy. The earth is a constant one. Vance shook his head, a mixture of pity and amusement on his face, and rode away. The story of the exchange spread through the saloon that evening like wildfire, and with it, a name was born. They started calling him the Mole Man, a term of gentle mockery that soon hardened into the town's accepted truth about the strange old man on the hill. He was an eccentric, a fool digging his own peculiar grave. They did not understand that he was not digging to escape the world, but to survive it. His ancestors had come from a land of brutal winters, where survival was etched not in wood, but in stone and sod, in the deep, quiet wisdom of the ground itself. The mockery became a low hum in the background of his life, a constant reminder of his isolation. Men would ride by his plot and shout jests. Found your way to China yet, Mole Man, or mind you don't dig so deep you fall out the bottom. He never responded, his focus absolute. The rhythmic scrape of his shovel was his only answer. Bo would offer a low growl, a rumble of loyalty in his deep chest, but Jedediah would place a calming hand on his head. Their judgment was air, the earth was substance. As summer baked the valley, turning the grasses to pale gold, he continued his descent. He acquired a pair of sturdy cows, leading them not to a pasture, but down a wide, gently sloping ramp into the growing subterranean space. This act solidified his reputation as a madman. Keeping livestock underground. It's unnatural, declared one woman at the general store. The man's addled, plain and simple, but Arthur, the town's blacksmith, a man who understood the properties of unyielding materials, watched with a different kind of eye. He saw the precision in Jedediah's work. He saw the heavy timbers, purchased with what little money Jedediah had, being lowered into the earth to shore up the walls. He saw not madness, but a terrifying, methodical purpose. Arthur saw the carefully planned ventilation shafts, disguised on the surface as small piles of rock, designed to draw in fresh air and expel the warm breath of living bodies. He saw a man preparing not for a season, but for a reckoning. While others laughed, Arthur felt a cold knot of apprehension tighten in his gut. He began to lay in more coal than usual, his hammer strikes on the anvil ringing with a new, unspoken urgency. The interior of Jedediah's creation was a marvel of practicality and foresight. It was no mere burrow. It was a sanctuary, a fortress of soil and timber. One cavernous chamber housed the 2 cows, their soft lowing echoing gently off the earthen walls. The space was dry, insulated, and filled with a thick bed of hay that he had spent weeks harvesting and hauling below. Another section was a vast, orderly woodshed, stacked to the ceiling with seasoned firewood, enough to outlast a dozen normal winters. Between the two was his living space, a simple but comfortable room carved from the earth itself. A stone-lined hearth and chimney, built with the skill of a master mason, rose up through the ground to a discreet opening on the surface. He had a bed built into an alcove, a sturdy table, and shelves for his meager supplies. The air was cool but not cold, filled with the clean, honest smells of earth, pine, and hay. It was a place of profound quiet, the boisterous winds that scoured the hill above reduced to a distant, muffled whisper. Here, underground, the world's judgment could not penetrate. Bo would lie by the hearth, his head on his paws, in a state of perfect contentment. Jedediah had created a pocket of enduring life, a self-contained ecosystem shielded by the immense, insulating power of the planet itself. Above ground, Prosperity was a town of sharp angles and fragile surfaces, exposed to the sun, the wind, and whatever else the sky chose to unleash. Below, Jedediah's home was a place of curves and depths, a testament to the belief that true strength was not in defiance of nature, but in humble cooperation with it. He was not hiding, he was abiding. Autumn arrived with a strange, unsettling clarity. The air grew sharp, but the colors of the turning leaves seemed too vibrant, almost feverish. The birds left weeks earlier than usual, their formations vast and panicked against the bruised purple of the twilight sky. The squirrels and chipmunks moved with a frantic energy, their chittering a high-strung hymn of anxiety. Jedediah saw it all. He felt the change in the pressure of the air, a heavy stillness that felt like the world holding its breath. He doubled his efforts, hauling the last of his provisions underground, ensuring his ventilation shafts were clear. He made one final trip to town. He found Sterling Vance on the porch of the land office, rocking in his chair, exuding an aura of unassailable confidence. "Vance," Jedediah began, his voice low and urgent, "you need to warn the people." Vance stopped rocking and gave him a weary, patronizing look. "Warn them of what, old man?" "A badger attack." The men with him chuckled. "A winter is coming," Jedediah said, ignoring the jibe. "One that this valley has not seen in a lifetime. The signs are in the sky, in the flight of the birds, in the silence of the forest." Vance stood up, brushing imaginary dust from his waistcoat. "We've had hard winters before, Jedediah. We are a hardy people. We trust in our sturdy cabins and our full larders, not in holes in the ground. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have business to attend to." Sensible business. He turned his back, a clear dismissal. Jedediah stood there for a moment, the laughter of the men washing over him. He looked at their proud, defiant faces, at their sturdy, exposed homes. He saw not strength, but a terrible, brittle arrogance. He turned and walked away, Bo trotting silently at his heel, leaving the town to its confidence and its fate. The first flakes fell not with gentle grace, but as hard, stinging pellets, driven by a wind that didn't howl so much as scream. It was a living thing, a malevolent entity that clawed at the town of Prosperity, seeking every crack, every seam, every weakness. Within hours, the sky was gone, replaced by a churning, blinding maelstrom of white. The world shrank to the walls of one's own home. At first, the townsfolk were unconcerned. They lit their fires, told stories, and congratulated themselves on their foresight. But the storm did not abate. It intensified. The wind scream deepened into a tectonic roar that vibrated through the very timbers of their homes. Snow began to pile up not in inches, but in feet, then in yards. It buried fences, then windows, then climbed the walls toward the roofs. The cold was a physical presence, a predator that seeped through the walls, its icy fingers extinguishing the warmth from their hearths. Wood piles that were meant to last a month were consumed in days. Below the fury, in the deep, silent earth, Jedediah sat by his fire, the soft glow illuminating the earthen walls. He could hear the storm, but it was a distant, abstract thing, a muffled rage far above him. Bo slept peacefully, twitching in a dream, his flank rising and falling with untroubled breaths. The cows chewed their cud, their warmth adding to the stable, comfortable temperature of the shelter. Jedediah would occasionally walk to the base of his main ventilation shaft and listen. He could hear the shriek of the world tearing itself apart, and he felt not triumph, but a profound and sorrowful pity for the people who had chosen to face it with nothing but wood and pride. After 3 days, the screaming stopped. A new kind of terror descended upon the valley, the silence so absolute it felt like the end of the world. The temperature plummeted to a depth that no one had ever experienced, a cold that could freeze a man's breath in his lungs. Inside their homes, the people of prosperity were trapped. Their doors were buried under 15 feet of snow, their windows were blind with it. Their fires were long dead, the last of their firewood gone. Frost crept across the interior walls in beautiful, deadly patterns. They were living in tombs of their own making. For Jedediah, the silence above was a signal. He rose, banked his fire, and began to dig. Not down, but up. He followed the path of his sloped entrance tunnel, shoveling the dense, packed snow back into the main chamber. It was hours of exhausting work, but he was driven by a grim purpose. Finally, his shovel broke through into a strange, blue-filtered light. He emerged into a world remade, a landscape of impossible, rolling white dunes where a town had once stood. The air was so cold it burned his throat. The only sign of human life was a thin, desperate wisp of smoke rising from the buried chimney of the blacksmith's shop. He and Bo made their way across the surreal terrain, the dog sinking to his belly with every step. He found Arthur, gaunt and shivering, burning the last of his wooden furniture to stay alive. Jedediah, the blacksmith, whispered, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and despair. "We were fools, there is no time for that," Jedediah said, his voice firm. "Gather who you can. I will lead the ways together." They began the desperate work of rescue, digging down to rooftops, calling out to the entombed survivors, a small handful of whom were still alive, huddled together in the lethal cold. He didn't say, "I told you so," he simply said, "There is warmth. There is food." "Follow me." A ragged, shivering procession of the humbled followed the mole man across the frozen wasteland, their eyes fixed on the dark hole in the hillside that was now their only hope. The descent into Jedediah's shelter was like entering another world. The biting wind vanished, replaced by a calm, cool air that felt impossibly warm. The sight that greeted them silenced any remaining vestiges of pride. They saw the 2 cows, placid and healthy in their spacious stall. They saw the mountain of firewood, a testament to a foresight they could barely comprehend. They saw the simple, orderly living space, the hearth emitting a steady, life-giving heat. The survivors, their faces blackened by frostbite and etched with trauma, sank to the earthen floor, overcome with relief and a profound, shattering sense of shame. They had mocked this place. They had called its creator a madman. And now it was their ark, the only reason they were still alive. Sterling Vance, his fine coat in tatters and his face a mask of frozen agony, was among them. He stumbled toward Jedediah, who was ladling hot broth into bowls. Vance's knees buckled, and he fell before the old man, not in supplication, but in total surrender. "We were wrong," Vance choked out, his voice breaking. "We laughed. We mocked you." He looked around the life-filled cavern, his eyes filled with tears that froze on his cheeks. "We built for the sun, and the sky betrayed us. You built for the earth." Jedediah looked down at the broken man, his expression unreadable. He offered Vance a bowl of broth, his hand steady. "The land speaks," he said, his voice quiet but resonant in the hushed space. It tells us of its memory of fire, of flood, of the long ice. We only need to learn how to listen. The words hung in the air, simple, profound, and absolute. There was no accusation, only a truth as solid as the ground beneath their feet. In that moment, the collective arrogance of prosperity died, replaced by a humbling, life-altering reverence. The great blizzard, which the survivors would forever call the White Death, became the defining event in the history of prosperity. When the spring thaw finally came, revealing the full extent of the devastation, the lesson Jedediah had taught them was seared into their collective soul. They did not abandon the valley. They rebuilt, but they rebuilt differently. They learned from the man they had once ridiculed. New homes were constructed with deep, stone-lined cellars connected by tunnels. A massive, communal storm shelter, based on Jedediah's design, was excavated in the center of town. They began to study the land, to observe the patterns of the seasons and the behavior of the animals with a new, sober respect. The nickname Mole Man was never again uttered as an insult. It became a title of honor, a name spoken with a reverence usually reserved for founding fathers and prophets. Jedediah never sought a position of leadership, but he became the town's quiet moral compass. People would seek him out not for orders, but for his quiet wisdom, for his ability to see what they could not. He taught them how to read the land, how to prepare, how to be humble. Years later, long after Jedediah and Bo had been laid to rest on the quiet hill above the home he had built, a team of government surveyors passed through the valley. Using new scientific instruments, they discovered a unique geological formation beneath the hill, a deep pocket of geothermal warmth that kept the ground at a stable temperature year-round. It was a one-in-a-million anomaly. They marveled at the pioneers' incredible luck in choosing that exact spot. But the people of prosperity knew it wasn't luck. It was knowledge, an ancient, intuitive wisdom passed down through generations, a knowledge that knew how to listen to the earth's secrets. What, then, is the true nature of wisdom? Is it found in the bold lines of a blueprint, in the confident proclamations of leaders, in the structures that reach defiantly for the heavens? Or does it reside in quieter places? Does it live in the patient observation of a bird's flight, in the feel of the soil, in the inherited memory that whispers we are not masters of this world, but its temporary guests? The story of Jedediah is not simply one of survival. It is a story about the eternal conflict between pride and humility. Prosperity was a town built on pride, on the belief that humanity's will could conquer all. They built their monuments of wood and glass, facing the sky, daring it to do its worst. Jedediah, in his quiet humility, chose to cooperate with a power far greater than himself. He did not conquer the earth, he joined it. He did not defy the storm, he respected its power and sought shelter in the one place that had endured every storm since the beginning of time. Have you ever felt a silence so complete that you could hear the planet breathing? Jedediah lived in that silence. He understood that true strength isn't about how loudly you shout your intentions to the world, but about how closely you listen to its truths. His legacy was not written in laws or etched onto a plaque. It was written into the very foundation of the rebuilt town, in the deep cellars and the shared stores of food, in the community's newfound respect for the whims of the sky and the constancy of the earth. The simple, stone-lined chimney still stands on that hill, a quiet monument to the man who listened, a timeless reminder that sometimes, the deepest wisdom is found not by looking up at the stars, but by trusting the ground beneath our feet.